This is one of the Spanish interpreters. We do not seem to have audio here in Zoom. Unless you guys are super quiet.
IT folks, just let us know.
Perfect, thank you.
These individuals, that's okay.
Can you hear us now online?
Can you hear us now?
Yes.
Okay. For anyone who's in the audience or online, just so we know, we have Hannah and the ASL interpreters for deaf and hard of hearing. We also have our Spanish interpretation tonight, this afternoon as well for our study session. Okay. All right. Moving on, I'm going to move it to the 2024-2025 Staffing and Enrollment Study Session. Turn it over to Superintendent Booker.
Thank you very much. I want to welcome everyone to this afternoon's study session.
So sorry to interrupt before we proceed. Do you want the interpreters to give an announcement or be assigned?
Set up our time and expectations about what we're trying to achieve today. But before I do that, I first want to thank and introduce Don Scatena, who's our Director of Student Services, who's going to be supporting us in this afternoon's presentation, Dr. Kirk Black, and Brian Williams, our credential analyst. So I really appreciate them giving up time this afternoon and to support this conversation. For the community, the purpose and outcome goals for this study session really center around educating the board and community on how the district develops enrollment projections, processes student enrollment, and how this data, along with contractual agreements and other considerations, influences our staffing. And when I say staffing, I mean the human capital that we have at our school sites, whether that's certificated teachers or administrators, classified support staff, and so on and so forth. There are no actions or decisions tonight, so the board can relax. There's no actions to take this evening, but it's really a learning opportunity as to how district administration, site administration works through the push and pull of enrollment trends and our pre-built staffing ratios affect staffing. Needless to say, staffing is complicated. It's both a science and an art. There are never enough resources. I'll just say that. Every school site wants more. Every program wants more. And one of the things that's amazing about this district is how adept staff have been in two areas. One, in going out and getting more resources. In November, we'll talk about all of the one-time grants, the 3-year grants, all the grants we've worked really hard to get to support additional staffing. And these are opportunities that a lot of school districts up and down the state of California don't get. And so I want to thank and congratulate our staff for all the hard work in getting those additional resources for our students and for our communities. So not only are we adept at getting more resources, I also want to congratulate all of our educators for maximizing what we're able to do for students, for our communities with the resources we have. And let me say once again, there are never enough resources. We always want more, all of us. When it comes to staffing, it's always trying to find a balance between contractual agreements, enrollment fluctuations, one-time monies that we just discussed, and site and student needs. And there's continuously a push and pull there. And we try to be as agile as we can with the restraints and limitations we know we have. We may want to add staff at a site, and we find ourselves sometimes not able to find a staff member because there's a massive teaching shortage going on across the Bay Area, the state of California, and the nation. So tonight we're going to present our enrollment processes and timeline. We're going to shift to staffing processes and the varying factors that go into allocating human capital to our school sites in support of student learning. It is, like I said, a very, very complicated equation. I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions. And this is where I want to remind the board and the community about the work we did last year. Last year, we participated in a group book study around effective governance. And one of the metaphors that was used in this book study was our roles either in the balcony or on the dance floor. There is no expectation that the board memorizes all of our staffing ratios and all of the different processes that we use to implement that balance of staffing within our school sites. When we look at our different roles, those staffing ratios, how we build out school sites, all of those kinds of things, that's really within the purview of the admin team. The board, we look at contractual agreements, what our contracts say around staffing, and how we look at taking those contractual agreements and implementing them across school sites. One of the things when we get to the end of our presentation this afternoon is food for thought around how we might want to look at differing school sites. Last year, if we remember, we talked a little bit about declining enrollment and how that's impacting some of our schools that already have low enrollment and what that means for elective programs. And maybe we should consider staffing a little bit differently to try to save those elective programs, especially around the breadth of elective programs, to provide an equitable experience for our students across the districts, regardless of what school you go to. So those are some considerations we'll think about this evening. Like I said, we won't come to decisions tonight, but as we gear up for a November study session on our budget, these are things we're going to want to consider as we start building out staffing for the 24-25 school year come late winter, early spring. And so this gives the board an opportunity to understand our processes, one, and to start thinking about, two, how we might want to move forward as we approach the November budget study session and beyond. So I hope I haven't convoluted it even more. And as we go, please interrupt, ask questions. And if it gets a little much, I get it, and it is much, and there's a lot that goes into staffing. I've actually asked our staff to make it as detailed as possible. And the point behind that is to show the board and the community all of the varying components that go into staffing. It is a lot, especially in a big district like ours. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Don Scatena. He's our Director of Student Services, the champion of our enrollment processes, and he's going to walk us through that part before handing it over to Dr. Black and Brian Williams and myself. So as chair of the meeting, what I'd like to do, since this is a study session, I'd like us to kind of stop and pause for each of the slides so that we can ask. I mean, we've been down this road before with the enrollment, and you know how it goes. There's going to be certain questions at certain stages. So let's have that conversation. I think it's important to have that discussion as we go with each of the slides. Sometimes it's going to be nothing, but again, sometimes, and I'm glad we're differentiating instruction here, where the new folks are going to maybe ask a lot of questions that are unknowns. Some of us oldies might go, hey, wait a minute, what I remember from before is blah, blah, blah. So however, if you don't mind, let's kind of pause at each, at moments, if that's okay, Don and Kirk. And
yeah.
Okay. Okay.
I'd
Good.
say experience, not old.
You got to use
turn your
mic.
microphone on, Don. Thanks.
Got to repeat that fun. That was fun.
Think it's on now.
Yeah.
Okay. So I just want to take over what exactly we're gonna cover. We're gonna cover quite a few things. We're gonna cover projections. We're gonna cover and enrollment in that order, and then staffing. Each one has different components. We're going to be covering the setting dates for enrollment process, which we have just done, partner district data that we receive from our partner and community districts, or where our middle school students come from. Our enrollment window, what that looks like, the projection data, how we arrive at projection data, how we have long-term and short-term projection data, the analysis, our board presentation that we do every February, and then our lottery system that we have. Under staffing, we're going to have a timeline and a general staffing allotment, staffing capacities, ratios, and staffing site allocations, and hiring and overstaffing and transfers, and how that works for our staffing. This first slide is meant to show you what it looks like for student services when it comes to how we identify projections and do projections and enrollment. It starts with setting our timeline for the following year. So we're always about somewhere around 6 months in student services. We're always about 6 months looking ahead. So right now, actually October right now is pretty much enrollment season's summer, if you can understand that. It's our slowest month. It's when I allow staff to take vacations, things like that, because we are between. We've already enrolled all the students, the late enrollments are all in, and we haven't really started that enrollment season yet, but that will be happening in November. And so you can see that we set our dates in August for enrollments. We start doing CBEDS reports. CBEDS is a super important part of identifying the exact numbers that we have for our California Basic Education data system. In addition, we have our partner district data that we get from our partner districts, from San Mateo, Foster City, from Burlingame, from Millbrae School District, San Bruno Park, and from Hillsborough and Millbrae. So we gather that data. Then the schools have 8th grade nights. They invite all the 8th grade families to 8th grade nights to give them information about their programs. That is sort of also an opportunity for families to see different schools. So if they did want to request a transfer, that there's a unique program or something that's unique to their child or their student, that they could request a transfer later in the process. Then we begin what we call P1, or priority enrollment. And what do we mean by priority enrollment? When you hear that term, priority enrollment means if you enroll in our district in the window for priority enrollment prior to setting capacities and staffing, then you are guaranteed your home school for enrollment. After that time, we sometimes, although we haven't done it in probably 10 years, you could be forced to a different school site if the school is at capacity and cannot take any new enrollments. We have not had that come up in many, many years in our district. In addition, we start looking at the actual enrollments from the roll-up, but also we look at our PowerSchool predictive analytics data. And then we use that data to start to inform our decisions. In January, we start making decisions about what maybe a recommendation to the board would be for staffing and for capacities and staffing. And then we do a board presentation on what the actuals are in February. And it's at that time that the board takes action and sets the presentation, sets the actual capacity limits. And then at that time, we're also already working on our staffing model.
I can see you're getting ready to flip. Is there any questions at this point regarding the timeline and what's happening with partner districts or CBEDS or anything of that? Nope. Let's do it. We're rocking. Oh, here we go.
Just real quick, if people they live inside the district, but they want to say my kid wants to attend Burlingame and we're zoned for Hillsdale, when would that be in this timeline? That
happens in November when they do their initial enrollment, and then they make the request for the transfer. You're allowed to pick one school for transfer.
Got it. Okay.
So it's not a system that sets up there. You can prioritize 1, 2, and 3. And then our first choice is, we have a slide on this, but your first choice, if you have a sibling, you're the first student or family to go. So if there's an older sibling, that they still have to apply for the transfer, but they get it in automatically as part of the process.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions about the timeline?
You have the numbers from the partner districts already?
No.
From CBIDS? Not yet.
Yeah.
So
It's October.
President Land, that's a really good question in that today's presentation isn't about next year's projections at all,
Right.
whether we're talking enrollment or staffing. This is really about our processes. I think on this timeline, it shows a board presentation on enrollment in February, and that's where Don will come back and talk about what our real projections are after all those kinds of things.
I was just looking at the one where it said parent partner district data available. that one. So I was like, it was a question
differs
not for specifics, but you
from
know what I mean.
district to district.
Right.
And some schools have a very large department that gets us that data available. Sometimes we have to work very closely with our partner districts.
Got it.
So
That's
no,
kinda
it's
what I
not
thought.
available. It's not available yet.
That's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
So giving you an idea, we did set our enrollment dates. You can see these are our actuals for what's coming up. This is on our district website. This talks to you about when the enrollment window opens. So November 6th, families can go online and begin the process this year. February 9th is when our priority enrollment window would close. And the lottery would happen right around February 9th is the estimated time. And then we send out data confirmation to confirm all of our enrollments and their addresses and phone numbers and parent contacts and things like of that nature every summer. That's what we call summer census, or what we call the summer data confirmation. And so that happens every summer with our families. So partner district data, as we've been talking about, it does not make sense to ask for the data before CBEDS. So that's the system for identifying and the actuals that you actually send off to the state. So after the CBEDS date, we will begin the process of requesting data from our partner districts. Our data, sometimes that is usually available in October at some point, sometimes as late as mid-November. Depending on the district and what their capacity is at the time.
Can you remind me when CBED's data? It's like right now, right?
It's
Is
right
it
now.
what we're doing.
Yeah, it's
Are we
this window.
doing credentialing auditing too, or?
Okay. Our enrollment window, in general, it opens up the early November. Some of you that have been on the board for some time maybe remember that we were doing this in January years ago, but that we continue to push the envelope so that we can make our staffing decisions earlier and earlier than ever before. And so our priority in one enrollment window opens and then closes the first week of February before that Friday of the same week that I do the presentation establishing our capacities, and then the following week we do the lottery. It's an application. Inside the application, families can request transfers, intra-district transfers to various schools. It's inside the priority enrollment window that you are allowed to do the transfers. After priority window closes, you cannot request a transfer through this system. And as a result, we set our wait lists. We set our students and families. Let's say there's 100 requests for a school. The lottery gives them a number in that order. And then that is sort of their wait list number.
Question. Also, just confirming that they get one transfer, one inter-district transfer.
One request for inter-district
Okay.
transfer a year. They can ask for a different school the following year. If they didn't get their transfer, they can ask. Historically, the board has approved all upper class requests because it's only about 10% of the freshman requests. It's a much smaller number. So they do have to still request. So an upperclassman, so a 10th through 12th grader, they still need to make the request for a transfer. Most of those are always approved because of a variety of factors, but for the most part, there are reasons with families moving, for students' health and well-being. There's a variety of reasons why we just approve all upperclassmen.
Thank you.
So arriving at projections is is a bit of a science, a bit of an art. We use a company, we use PowerSchool, which is their predictive enrollment analytics portion of PowerSchool. PowerSchool is a large company, works in many school districts for a variety of purposes. For us, we use it for our projections. It formerly was called Decision Insight. It was it was called something else. They will gather all the data from the K-8 districts. They're looking at kindergartners, they're looking at birth rates, they're looking at a variety of factors to arrive at these numbers. They're looking at construction. They're looking at new construction that's coming online. These are all factored into their projections. You may remember, I think 3 years ago, there's a portion of Burlingame that is industrial area. It's not even zoned currently, or formerly was zoned for Millbrae or for Burlingame. And with knowing and looking at the projection data ahead, that we knew we were going to have capacity issues at Burlingame potentially if we brought any more apartments, condos online. And so in that industrial area, sort of the Rollins Road area, that area was, we identified mills for that area. And so when a new construction comes online, they would the students that would live there would be going to mills. And so we get this data. It gives it can go out about 10 years. In the projection. Amazingly, it's pretty darn accurate on the actual numbers of increase and decrease pretty well, but it doesn't always factor in other economic factors that are going on that are maybe moving faster than the predictive data can give. And so those are just my anecdotal feedback about some of the things that I've seen when the data was inaccurate. It's usually because it didn't predict that there was going to be a recession, or didn't predict there was going to be a housing shift and things of that nature.
I have a question about
Me
that.
too.
Oh, sorry.
No, you go first.
With the city councils, do they give us information on their housing plans since there's, a lot of construction and building?
That is a great question. So whenever housing comes online and they're about to help me, Yancy, if you're here, there's usually there's a formal request during the construction portion prior to breaking ground, where they have to identify the schools and the capacities of those schools. And we identify an address, and we say, they give us an estimate of maybe how many students they predict. And then we tell them which school they would be going to, because I think because of how they ask for design, they have to identify the school, the local schools K through 12.
Yes, correct. And we're required by law to provide that. But we're also allowed to note, and we do, that all placements are subject to change by action of the Board of Trustees at any time. So basically, if something is approved, that doesn't guarantee anything. It notes at that moment when it's approved what school that they would be zoned to, elementary, middle, and high school.
Talking about the example that Dawn was talking about,
Uh-huh.
the predictive part of that area may be converted to residential area over time, because the upper part of Rollins Road was in Burlingame was being really
Mhm.
producing a lot of housing. And
Yeah.
so since we did know that, that's one of the reasons why we made the motion and changed the districting. So I mean, it's something that we should take into account, but I don't think there's active communication between city
Right.
council to us, but again, through legal channels, and what happens that way, I think is how we figure it out. I think Decision Insight has there's some factors there.
There's a certain range when they are able to, there's a process, Yancey probably knows a lot more about it, but when there's a construction that's going to come online, I know that Decision Insight or, PEA here, they identify that. So they know and can predict into the future. So for example, the most The current example would be Bay Meadows. Bay Meadows, you saw this huge leap in our enrollment in the district when Bay Meadows was being constructed. Well, it was actually in our data probably 5 years prior to Bay Meadows coming online and actually having people living there, that it was in our data for the projections because they had asked for it so far in advance.
Do the councils share any of the survey information that they collect from the community about housing? And then also about answer that one first and I'll remember the next one.
We're not normally asked about the housing situation. They usually focus on the schools for us. So when they ask us questions, it's usually related to the schools that are going to be providing the housing in this neighborhood. They look at many factors like transportation, and they're looking at all the different environmental impacts going into it. As part of that exploration, they identify that, it's Aragon High School, it's Burlingame High School, it's Cappuccino High School that's coming on. That will be the school that the high school students attend.
What about with HIP housing and Mid-Penn and all of those places? They also have families that live there or that have housing through their programs. Is any of that information shared?
So that is a great question. Realizing that it's probably factored into the analysis when there's housing or shelters, things of that nature brought online. But realizing that those students, if identified as a unhoused student, they have rights to school of origin. So if they became unhoused in a school while attending a school in a different location, even though they're in the boundaries, they would have rights to a transfer by ed code.
Okay. Yeah,
There is that law. I forgot what it's called, but there's a law on that.
AB 167.
What is it?
AB 167.
Yeah, and it reminds me of the housing plans in Millbrae. If when they do build, when they do provide that housing opportunity for folks, there's going to be people coming into that district, students. And so, I was listening to the meetings online and they were talking about how the Millbrae School District is losing enrollment. But then with those types of developments, it might help. So
I think one thing that I want to add, and I know Terry wants to talk, and I really apologize, but I want to keep the conversation going. It's really interesting because with these new housing buildings that are the apartments and things that are being done, it's not necessarily having a huge impact on our K-8 districts, which then in turn doesn't have a big impact on us.
Right.
So it's remarkably lower than you consider. And it's strange because you'd think, oh, these are going to be family houses, and then that's going to be a big boom for Millbrae. They're still in declining enrollment, and
if they're allowed to transfer somewhere else, then are they going to different schools?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Anyway,
Thank you.
there's lots of factors there, but and I've learned this from Don in the past. So I'm just relaying information that I remember from him in the past. So Terry, you were going to go.
I was going to comment on what you guys are both talking about. So when I was on the other school district in San Bruno, we used, I don't know if it was Total Schools Resource or Total School Solution. I can't think of the vendor name, but when they were going to give us projections, they didn't reach out to city council. They would reach out to the city manager's office to look at the projects that were on the horizon, 5-year, 10-year, 15-year. And then they would look at the percentage of probability. But unfortunately, things happen and sometimes projects are delayed. So for example, the Mills Park project in San Bruno, part of the enrollment for San Bruno Park for I think it's 2024 and 2025, there were about 50 or 60 students that were, forecasted. I guess that's looking at a forecast. They were forecasted, but they haven't
Projected. Yeah.
projected. There you go. Projected. I'm a numbers person, so it's forecast, but projected. Thank you. But they haven't broken ground yet because they're really delayed, a couple of years delay in the project. So of course that's going to affect everybody downstream, such as the high school district as well. So I think that was your question too. Is it when a vendor is asked to give a projection, they reach out to the city managers for all cities that are in that school district boundary. And then it's probability. And then it's but then in this case, we're not going to have those 50 students for San Bruno Park. We're not going to have the high school students that would live in that area that would go to Cappuccino. Maybe the following year, maybe 2 years later, but they give us the best estimate at the time.
Thank you.
I did have one question about, and I'll just delay it because I think it's going to be on the next one. I just saw your analysis. So I'll shut up now. Go.
So in summary, it's a very elaborate dashboard that has all our data, and we're able to do many different things with it and really get granular with it. But for you all just to know that we have this capability, we look at all aspects of it. So and then in December and January, we start to get we have the actual data coming in from students that we could expect. So this isn't projected data, this is actual data of what we can predict as students are going to enroll with us or started the enrollment process with us in December and January. And then we go through and we monitor this over the 3-month period. We also look at past trends. For example, percentage of students that don't enroll with us, which you could predict those students likely go to private schools or charter schools, things of that nature. And it's usually a pretty our charter schools and private schools, they don't usually have wild swings in seat capacity. So it's pretty predictive what we would look at for when we have that type of enrollment coming out of our system. We use some form of either conservative moderate model. Predictive, the Power School system can give us a moderate model. It can give us a conservative model. We generally use a conservative model. Last year we used a moderate model, if you remember. And then the enrollment projection and data is that recommendation is given to inform staffing in our HR department with business services. And then we make those recommendations and show the data to our site administrators so they can start making some predictions about and long plans about potential staffing. So that presentation takes place in February. This is a example of the sheet that often you'll see, and you can see that it will show the past year. It will show what the changes would be for the following year and what the recommendation would be from the administration.
I have a question about the private school enrollment. So have you seen any trends in how the cost of living going up? Has that affected how many students we're getting now that would have gone to private school versus public?
Our projections were actually, as you'll see, that we were, off by about 150 students, something in that range overall for our incoming students. You'll see that in the presentation later in October and in February of what we're looking at. I don't know if we could specifically say that is due to the cost of living and the price of private school instruction in schools, but I would say that it's probably not helping.
Thank you.
The last time we saw that was 2008, because we have large numbers of people leaving California now in general.
Yeah.
But in 2008, I think we saw a demonstrated switch from private schools to public schools just because of the economy.
Uh-huh.
In K-8 too.
Yeah.
Jennifer?
I just had a question. If this isn't really relevant, then let's not spend time on it. But why do you have this enrollment minus 3% ninth grade column? What does that mean? And why are all of those numbers smaller except for Hillsdale is bigger?
Yeah, we really don't do that too much anymore.
Okay.
But it's a predictive analysis based on, it's about 3% of what we predict as if every student that lived in our boundaries went to our schools, it's about a 3% markup. So that gives you an idea. So if every private school student and charter school student attended our schools, it's about 3%.
Oh, so it's making an account for that.
It sort of accounts for it. I purposely moved away from this because some schools, so for example, it's not fair to, some schools have a higher than 3%, others it's lower than 3%.
Mm-hmm.
So it's better to do it. And when we do it, we usually do it at the school level.
Okay.
For example, Burlingame High School has a much higher percentage of students who live in their boundaries who attend private school.
Okay.
Yeah, and remember this data, I think this is from 2016, 17. I
Right.
purposely used old data, so weren't really having a conversation about the numbers because it's really about the
It's
process.
the idea.
Yeah.
It's the idea of what
That's why I
we
wasn't sure
want
if
to
it was
take you
worth
through.
talking about,
Yeah.
but
But it's great because it does count for and it just shows that we do try to account for the number of private students who go to private school, because sometimes they're embedded into the roll-up data. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes students just go from private school to private high school. But we still have that predictive data in there.
okay. Thanks.
In last February and every February, we'll be coming forward with a presentation. Presentation includes variety of factors with recommendations. Sometimes we make some predictions about some long-term things to think about in relation to whether we have capacity issues at certain school sites, things of that nature, that we have to make sort of bigger changes. There's data and projections, short-term and long-term. There's staffing, enrollment, capacity levels that are set at that meeting. We establish our capacities. As a result, we make recommendations around the lottery. Currently, our lottery is set for 25 seats at every school. And so just so you know, about 1 out of every 4 students transfer in our district. So that's about 25% of our students are at a school that they were not maybe in the boundaries for. And they do that through the intra-district transfer request process going into their freshman year. But some students will ask for between 10th grade and 12th grade will ask for transfers also. It's just a much smaller number. It's about 10% of the overall.
Just want to confirm. So Hillsdale doesn't have a home. Does it have a home area? But
It does.
it does.
Yeah.
So, but it's more open to transfers.
Correct.
Okay. That's I was trying to remember. Okay. Got
And
it.
remember, they have due to their housing, how they do their houses,
The house.
there is sort of a exact number they can and cannot do, right? Because it's got to hit that exact number
Right.
and not go above and not go too far below for them to sustain the small learning communities.
Right. That's what I was trying to remember. Thank you.
And here's just an example of the intra-district transfer requests. The process looks like, because it's a process that you'll be asked quite often about, maybe socially in the community. I'm asked very often about it when I'm out at the grocery store and whatnot. But so it's 25 seats have been established. We transfer up to the school's capacity within reason. And then we do one-to-one transfers after that. So for example, if we know Aragon and Burlingame are both at their capacities that we established, but there are now 20 requests to go to Aragon from Burlingame and 20 requests from Aragon to go to from Burlingame to go to Aragon. We just make 40 families happy with one decision, matching them up.
Question.
Yeah, just in case I get asked, how is the wait list rank determined? Is that by the date that you submit your enrollment? Is it
Great
by
question.
upper class? Yeah.
So Char and I and a couple of members of my team meet with the presidents of the parent organizations of each one of the schools so they can observe the process. It is entirely random. The only students that get a priority are the siblings. So the only ones that we take off the list and we do them before we do the lottery are the siblings. They don't count toward the 20 to 25 seats. And the siblings, it's not such a huge number. It doesn't impact greatly this, but we have policy around siblings need to be with their siblings unless there's a request for them not to be together, which also happens sometimes. So. I think I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Black.
Nice job. Thank you, Mr. Scatena. I also want to thank President Land and Superintendent Booker for having this study session. Brian Williams has been doing position control or staffing for it's about 9 years now. And it takes a lot of time to do this, but it's work that usually is in the background. But, we take a lot of pride in it. And I think if we do our jobs well, it will stay in the background. But we really do appreciate kind of highlighting this process. Here we wanted to start with the timeline, just a general overview, and then we can get into some specifics. And we're really going to get into some specifics, a lot of data, a lot of numbers here. So I hope it goes well. The staffing timeline, first we get together early in December and January with superintendent and cabinet, and we review the procedure, and we review the budget and the board's guidance, the board's goals, and make sure how we intend to do staffing and is in line with all of those things. By the time February comes, we usually have most of our certificated teachers who are retiring. We have their notices because we did put the board did approve a incentive a few years ago, February 1st, and almost all of them, get the retirement in by then for that, and that's very, very helpful for staffing purposes. Mr. Castana talked about the February board meeting, and after that board meeting, we get the staffing allocation to the schools based on the projected student enrollment. In February and April, principals then determine the vacancies based on what their projected student enrollment is, what retirements, resignations they have, the temporary positions, if they're going to get any grant funding, those donations, those type of things, and then they start to post and recruit and work with other schools to see how they can fill those vacancies. March 15th, we need to have any.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So when you talk to the principals, is it one-on-one or is it kind of the group in your big meeting?
Well, right now, as you know,
Sorry.
we have mostly veteran principals either with us or in their careers. So we give them the numbers all together, and we have principals meetings every 2 weeks. So generally, it's in a group.
In a group meeting.
But if we have a principal with certain specifics at their school, or they're newer, or there's something that we need to talk about, certain teachers may be transferring, those type of things. It's definitely individual support.
Just curious.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
So after we get through, we haven't had layoffs in years. Non-reelects are minimal, but those are March 15th. We got to have them in. The schools start to do their student programming, both with incoming ninth graders, with their current students, with the classes that they're going to take the following year. And then throughout the spring and the summer, I did give this to one of the principals, and I just had master schedule in the spring, and she said, this goes on all summer, Kurt. Make sure the board knows we're working all summer on the master schedule.
Yes.
Same with recruitment. That starts in the spring, goes right up to the school. And then the superintendent's always on the hot seat with, staffing requests and staffing needs.
Congratulations, Superintendent Booker.
Thank you.
So the staffing allocation, kind of like the 3% that Don was talking about with enrollment, we used to provide schools with their staffing allocations based on 97% of their projected student enrollment. And we did that for years and years, the district. And we stopped doing that because, first of all, the budget got better, the budget picture got better after 2008, but also we've become better at projecting student enrollment. There's not as much fluctuations in our numbers as there used to be. It used to be that you'd have, if you had 1,500 kids at a school, you get 1,300. I mean, they just wouldn't show up. That's not the case so much anymore. So slowly but surely, we went up to 100% where we've been now for many years. The board several years ago approved capacities of the buildings, and that was based on studies that Yancey's department did and Don helped out with. And these, the second column there, are staffing capacities at the school site in terms of physical facilities. And you can see that the enrollments there on the last column were very much under what the buildings could actually contain in terms of student numbers. Okay, so this slide is going to get into staffing ratios, and the staffing ratios can be derived from a number of areas. It can be through, what's available in the budget. Negotiations could change the staffing ratios if you get grants or whatnot. They may determine, they may call for a certain ratio. State, we used to have the 20-1 in freshman English and math. So there's state and federal guidance, special education, those type of things. But this slide here, it's an overview, and we're concentrating on two, or we're demonstrating two different staffing methods. One is called for in the teacher's contract, and then what the other one is what we do, under that guidance and certainly under the board's approval. Our staffing ratio in the contract is 27.5 to 1. And what a staffing ratio is it's how many students per one teacher. And what we do with that 27.5 to 1 is we times that by 6, which is the number of periods that most of our students take. And then we divide that number by 5. And that staffing ratio on the teacher's contract comes to 33 students per section. You can see that there's a class size max of 35, but the staffing ratio generates 33 students per section. In the districts, on the staffing sheet, the district uses a 26 to 1 ratio, and that's because we times it by 6.4, meaning that we project 40% of our students will be taking 7 periods. So instead of 6 periods, we have 6.4, that's 40% of our students will take 7 periods. That's actually low because many of our seniors take 5 periods, and for each one of them, you add another to the 40% of the students that can take 7 periods. So, and this is just the general staffing. We have much more additional staffing. So, but at the very least, well over 40% of our students were budgeted to take 7 periods.
Kirk, you mentioned, like humanities or English being at 20
to 1.
20 to 1.
Yeah.
So how does that factor into what you're doing, what you're saying here?
Well, we didn't have that anymore. That was special funding by the state, and I forget what AB, whatever it was,
So
but
it
that was
came
on the
and
high school
went,
exam.
and now we're just,
Came and
this is
went.
what we're doing.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Because it had
Keep
to,
up.
it may still be at the elementary level. I'm not sure.
It is.
No,
Yeah,
it
I
is
did.
for some.
Class size reduction. fund.
Class size reduction in the elementary, but not middle school.
No,
Not.
not middle school. Okay.
No.
And then not in freshman anymore either.
Right.
Yeah. Although some districts have it in their contract, so they have to do it.
So
But
they're
we
stuck
didn't,
with
we
it,
don't
yeah.
have it. Yeah. Going down to the our ELD staffing is approximately 20 to 1. I missed the teacher load. That is 168 to 1 in the contract, and that's how many students a teacher has throughout the day with all 5 classes, and it's capped at 168.
Is that
And
contacts?
That's contacts, yeah. Our ELD staffing for designated ELD is about 20 to 1. We try to get that right. We try to maybe even go a little lower than that because we get students throughout the year, coming into the district. And but we aim for 20 to 1. And like I say, sometimes it's under, sometimes by the end of the year it's over. It's a really fluctuating population. We have agreed with the teachers union of 151 to 1 staffing student teacher load for ELD. And on the right, you can see that our teachers in designated ELD, many of them don't have all ELD classes. So therefore, we can't, they're all not going to be 151 to 159 to 1 day. Depending on how many classes they have, they will go to that. So if you have 1, it's 159 to 1. But if you have all 5, and a few of our teachers do, it'll be at least 125 to 1. We have a counselor's ratio of 425 to 1 in the contract, but we staff well lower than that at 370 to 1. And we actually have adjustments that you'll see later. And our ratio district-wide is about 345 to 1 in terms of school counselors. In the contract, Peninsula has a 28 student max per class. We don't staff, we staff at 24 to 1 in terms of general staffing. And then there's many sections that come, many opportunities for sections to come and FTE to come to Peninsula after the general staffing at 24 to 1. PE music, they have high ratios, higher ratios than the general ed. But there's some music classes with very few students, and it just depends. Like if it's the string or the orchestra or choir, they may not have anywhere near 48, but those are the maximums. And special education, nothing in the contract, but we adhere to a 22 to 1 for SAR or mild moderate, and then 12 to 1 or below for mod severe. It just depends on the program.
Can you go back for a second?
Yeah.
So SPED SAI, you still have that at every school, correct? SAI?
SAI, especially
At all
academic
high schools?
instruction, yes. Yeah, that's the directed studies, the mild moderate.
I
Mhm.
know.
Yeah, I know. So this one gets a little bit into the weeds, but we did want to talk about how there's students that leave the comprehensive high schools or they go into different programs, but they still may be associated to the program. And so we provide schools with additional student count for every student that either attends the middle college program, goes to Peninsula, is in a designated ELD program, or is in the mild to moderate SAI program. And, I guess the main reason we started to do this is we didn't want to disincentivize schools from helping students choose alternative means like Peninsula or wherever it is that they want to go. And they don't really do that, but we just didn't want to have that push-pull effect. So even though they're losing a student to Peninsula or to middle college, and losing may not be the right word, but they're moving on to another alternative program, that school still gets a third of that student count for their staffing. For ELD and SAI special education, they get 5/6 of the student, because a lot of those students, they may have 2 or 3 classes in either of those programs, but then they're taking electives 2 or 3 classes, and they're getting 5/6 of the student count. So that should cover, most of those students in their elective choices.
Trustee Griffin.
Just a quick question on slide 15. How did we determine that middle college and Penn was a third? And I know you just kind of, you discussed it with the 5/6 with the ELD. How did we determine those ratios or percentages?
Well, for middle college, not that many of them come back. I mean, but there is a good percentage of students that do come back to these sites for electives, music, drama, certainly athletics, but some courses. So we thought a third would be enough to cover that. And again, we don't want to disincentivize sites from
Supporting.
supporting students in their choices to go to middle college or Peninsula. I mean, that is a natural reaction because they're losing students for programs and that sort of thing. But for middle college, they do come back to the sites. So a third was, we thought, reasonable.
In today's day of data analytics, I thought you were going to say we analyzed it and came up with the actual numbers or something, but your professional judgment, I'm not questioning, but I just, was like, well, can we run a report to kind of?
We can't. So what happens is that for students that go to middle college and Peninsula, we don't always know that when we're doing the staffing, as we're saying, this is done in the spring. And for students to get behind and maybe need the Peninsula program, we don't know that in the spring. So what we try to do is base it on the year before and generate this. But the actual number of classes that a person at middle college might take really depends on if they're in the drama program, the band, or they like ceramics or something like that. So it does fluctuate depending on the people that move, the actual students that move. And this just gives us sites can rely on this number year to year, where if we're trying to base it on the year prior, it would change.
Just informational. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Another slide?
Yeah, so I wanted to ask if I could, the teacher's contract, so that column for the teacher's contract, that's what's agreed upon the contract, I assume. So I just found it interesting that the staffing ratio is 27.5 to 1. But then for Peninsula, it's 28. And I would think the students in Peninsula, they need more, what's the word, individualized support than a student from a traditional high school. So I was wondering how those numbers played out, but I guess that's what's in the contract, what's agreed upon, right? Is that?
Yes, and Superintendent Booker brought that to my attention
Oh.
earlier today, because that's what it looks like. But it's different, because the 27.5 to 1 is the staffing ratio, and that's where we times it by 6, divided by 5, and then it gets to 33. That's the staffing ratio. The class size max 28 is how much maximum per class. So it doesn't necessarily have to do with the staffing ratio. And we do it by 24 to 1 up in Peninsula. And again, that's general staffing, where there's more and more sections that can come on afterwards. But we all absolutely, I mean, that
Thank
is the
you.
case.
Thank you for
I
explaining.
was going to say, it looks like, because if you look at it, other schools, it's 35 to 1 maximum. So Peninsula is 28 maximum. Regular, other comprehensives are 35 maximum. So that's the maximum
No,
number,
you're
not the
absolutely right.
average.
I missed that
Correct.
because I'm looking at the staffing ratio, but the row right below it is the class size
Right.
max. Thank you for that.
Okay, so here's some numbers for you. I just wanted to show that on this slide, if you look at Aragon, the Aragon column there, and you see that there's 50 students at Middle College on row 4 and 13 that go to Peninsula on row 6. And then that's deducted from the 1,700, but it's only deducted by 42, not 30, not 63, because 42 is 2/3. And therefore that's where you see the third, that the school gets the third for each of those students. The same with SAI, and the same with SAI special education. As you'll see later in a later slide, for every SAI student, there's additional staffing. But this, if you look at row 9, let's say Aragon at 110, and that's how many students that go to Aragon that are in the SAI program. If you look at row number 13, we're only deducting 18 students. That's a 1/6. So therefore, for every SAI student, Aragon gets 5/6 of a student count, plus the staff member that is the case counselor. And that's because a lot of the students in SAI take many classes in general education, maybe only 1 or 2 in SAI, and that's why we come to 1/6. So that's a little more analytical. Little.
Yeah. Gotcha.
For the main offices, the site that includes principals, assistant principals, deans, and counselors. We wanted to show you how that was determined. For the counselors, again, we staff at 370 to 1, and you can see in the last row there, those are our counseling adjustments, and that typically goes through the superintendent. And so at 371, we have 24.8 FTE. But this year we added, as you can see, 0.2, 0.8, 0.4 at the different schools. And that is either out of the general fund or through a grant, a specific grant, like a college and career grant. And I think that's the Mills sections, but the 0.2 at Aragon and 0.8 at Cappuccino are just over and above. And that's why our district ratio is more like 340, 345 to 1.
Is this part of, going back, kind of connecting with Yancey's budget, the step down? Is this part of the step down?
The Mills might be, but not the Cappuccino or Aragon.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
I don't remember specifically if Mills
Yeah.
is part of a one-time grant. It may be that the additional counseling there. I can't remember, but I know Cappuccino and Aragon is not.
So that'll stay consistent,
Well,
maybe.
we have options there, meaning
Okay.
the 0.8 and the 0.2, and we'll see this a little bit later. That was like superintendent's prerogative based on expressed need, things like that. Is it guaranteed to occur year after year after year? No.
Okay.
Not
No,
necessarily.
actually, my original question just is the one that I really wanted, which was, because we were talking about the step down and elimination of stuff. And that's not necessarily the case here, but maybe Mills. but
I
not
just
the
can't
others.
remember off the top of
No,
my
no,
head.
and
So if there's
that's
Mills
kind of what
staff
I-
out there like freaking out, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. No, and
I don't know for sure.
I just wanted to know.
The counseling in the step down plan is for therapists,
That's
not
right.
counselors. So it's not
Okay.
academic counselors.
These are the academic counts.
Yeah.
Yes, these are academic
I'm good.
counselors.
That's what I needed to know.
There's
I'm
a
glad.
question.
There you go. Question over here.
Counselors for Bridge is 0. How did those students receive those services?
For
Counseling.
Academic
Bridge.
counseling.
for counseling, they have their own mental health therapists, but for counseling, I think that they have teacher leaders there. They're designated, so they're in a level that then generates their courses. ELD 1, ELD 2, ELD 3 at
Okay.
Bridge.
Okay.
And
And-
they take go ahead.
No, please.
No, and I was going to say then they have electives. Right now they're taking electives at Cemetery High School where there's openings.
And as Bridge can possibly continues to grow, these are considerations we're going to have to take into account. Do they grow to such a degree that they may require an academic counselor at some point or other positions, right? So you'll see later on their enrollment right now, and they're just continuing to grow. So we may have to react and adjust year year to year based on enrollment projections and all those kinds of things. So while it might say 0 right now because it's filled by other staff members, that doesn't mean it's going to be 0 forever necessarily.
Mhm.
Sure.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so the staffing sheet has 39 different rows, and each of those rows can generate FTE. So this is just a sampling. The first row, by far the biggest row that generates the most FTE, is the general staffing, and that's the 26:1. That's the top row. And then there's Peninsula. They have smaller staffing number, 24:1 instead of 26:1. And then ELD is 20:1. I didn't put the staffing ratio there, but that's what it is. Now you can see that not all schools have ELD staffing because this is for designated EL for a specific program of ELD. Right now, a few years ago, the board approved it from going from, I think it was 4 or 5 schools to 3 schools specifically. And that's Cappuccino Hills and San Mateo. That was a few years ago. That might change, but that's why those other schools, Aragon, Burlingame, Mills, they don't have ELD funding because they don't have a designated ELD program. They do have ELD students. The next row are our TOSAs, the professional development, the technology coordinators, and the multi-tiered system of support. Each of our schools have TOSAs, teachers on special assignment. And then the last row. So these are just samples. The last row are athletic and activity release periods.
I just want to jump back, and I want to thank Principal Wisniewski for one, watching in, and then she texts me to answer the question about those Mills counselors. So I want to read it because I want to give her credit for watching from afar. So Pam, thank you very much. She writes that the 0.4 counseling adjustment is to teach the dual enrollment classes, which are 10th grade college and which is a 10th grade college and career class. And we have 2 sections, each taught by a counselor. So Pam, out in the ether, thank you very much.
Thank you, Pam.
Somewhere.
Yeah.
Paying attention.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Student support. As you can see on the top, the total of FTE that goes strictly to student support courses are 20.4. That's a lot of FTE. We're very fortunate as a district to be able to provide that much support. Again, this is above and beyond the general allocation or any of those other rows that we had on the previous sheet. The way that these are calculated is that we determine the percentage of unduplicated student at each district as it relates to the total in the district, and therefore the sites get their percentages. Unduplicated is a term that came into use with the LCAP, and it's for we usually use the term HUGs, which is historically underserved groups of students. But in LCAP, they use unduplicated. We typically don't use that, but with data and CBEDs and that sort of thing, we use it because that's what it's called for. But you can see that the number of students, the funding follows the students, and then therefore they will the schools will provide different support classes. And examples of those, Brian?
It's usually things like literacy support, algebra, geometry support, AVID, guided studies, courses like that usually fall in that umbrella.
Right. So question on that, LCAP, we receive funding for these unduplicated students as part of I'm going to get all this wrong. Not categorical, but supplementary funding from the state, right? So I know I see all 3 of you like looking at each other. So it's like, I know what it is. Okay, there we go. Yancy, go.
So the LCFF creates a funding guarantee from the state. And so in that funding guarantee, the state has noted our unduplicated pupil count and created a guarantee. But just like regular LCFF funding, because we are basic aid and have above that level of funding, we do not get specific additional funds for these. The only thing that it is a complicated thing, but the old EIA funds, if you remember from 15 years ago, community funded basic aid school districts were held harmless on that and continue to receive them at their levels of, I think, 2012, 2013. So it's
So
We
that's our
don't receive
categorical funding.
correct. We receive a categorical hold harmless from the funding that we received back then. But as those have grown over the years, we have not seen any additional funds. And we do not see, this is close to $4 million of costs related to that. We do not see state funding near $4 million for these. That's funded by our general fund.
So my point being, if we were LCFF, funded it through LCFF through the state, we would be receiving the unduplicated funding to support this.
Correct.
These. But since we are basic aid community funded, we do receive some EIA funding for our unduplicated or supported groups or
Correct.
at-risk groups, but nowhere near to this degree.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, here are some more samples of those 39 rows. The first row is pretty impressive. The district really does walk the talk here when it comes to coaching our teachers. And the instructional coaches are assigned to teachers on full evaluation, and they help the teachers create goals for the year. They provide feedback and data collection and help them monitor their process as they go through the evaluation process with their administrator evaluator. They really become integral, and as we had the presentation a couple of weeks ago, they're highly valued by our teachers, and 6.4 really shows that we value them as a district. There's a couple. There's 2 grants on the next row: Learning Recovery and the A to G grant. Kind of like what we were talking about. We apply for them, or they're provided to schools, and they're not consistent year to year. So we have different rows for them. The third row there is foundation grants, and those are monies that school foundation raise, and then the principal works with the foundation to create sections on their schools. Not all schools do that. San Mateo High School is a good example where they have a very robust foundation, and some years they do buy sections, but the last couple they haven't. They've been using it for other, they have other goals and objectives with their money. But that's been a concern in the district for a while. Mills has started to generate a lot more money than they did, but they're nowhere near some of the schools. Cappuccino's in the same boat. So those are that's basically the foundation money on that line. And then
let me just jump in to say that part of what you're seeing here plays into my thinking around above staffing. And when I see some schools needing support in ways that some of our other schools already get through their foundations. So I try to make up some of that through our general fund to try to provide some equity across the district. And it's an odd system that we have here in San Mateo Union, where you have some schools and communities with a very strong foundation and others with either a beginning foundation or no foundation at all. And that's a big push and pull. I would say we're reasonably successful in that push and pull, but problems can arise. And so that's where later on in this presentation, you'll see some overstaffing that I implemented sometimes in result of that.
I'm gonna take a turn just to kind of talk about that equity issue. I think it's wonderful that we have communities that are willing to put extra money in to help afford extra enrollment for teachers and FTEs. But as Superintendent Booker's talking about, when we get into big issues like what we talk about, and this board is very active about equity and issues for students at risk with equity, we need to really take that into account too. And I mean, already we've talked about like the lower enrollment for, staffing for Peninsula, et cetera, et cetera. But I think, and ELD, which is great, but I think there's more to this conversation. And I just kind of want to allude to that. Yeah. So, yeah.
And Superintendent Booker may be a bit modest, because if you will see later, Cappuccino has, I think, 3.2 extra. So he definitely, that's double than any of the rest. So, that's definitely a consideration that when there's sections above and beyond the staffing, they do go to the schools that are unable at the moment anyway to raise funds anywhere near some of the other ones. The last row, there's different funding. As you see, Peninsula has a 1.0 for CTE. They have a really good foods and art program up there that the district provides. And then the 0.2s, most of those are for WASC. This year's a WASC, and we have a coordinator on a release period.
I have a question, sorry.
Okay.
How do you, Superintendent Booker, how do you determine how much support the schools have that don't have these robust foundations?
Yeah. So like what Trustee Griffin said, I don't have a report that I generate, but it's more through conversations with the principals, site conversations, like when you and I sat with the Cappuccino High School staff, or when I've sat with Peninsula High School staff and listened to some of the issues and concerns. I look at some of the historical trends, what some of the needs are. I specifically looked at enrollment trends and what that declining enrollment would do to some of the breadth of their elective programs, and wanting to maintain that breadth, or work with principals to be creative on how those opportunities can continue, even if we want to shift FTE around. So I would say most of those decisions are made through a lot of input, research, and conversation.
Thank you.
This is the special education staffing. There's 10 rows of special education staffing. The top one is the SAI program. So that's the main one, mild moderate. And so each student generates staffing here. And then, like we said earlier, they also generate 5-6 staffing for the school sites above this. So that 5-6 is above this staffing here, which is the first row. And then the adjustments, again, that's something that similar to what we were just talking about with above formula staffing. We work with the schools that need, a lot of times, you know, the student enrollment comes late for some of the special education programs. Sometimes we have teachers that have been there for a long time and the enrollment might go down a little bit, but we know in future years it'll probably go back up. So sometimes we have to give certain sections to maintain the continuity of the schools. The third row, every school now has a special department head release period. And then the rest are programs. You can see they're either programs or programmatic positions. So speech therapists, program specialists. We're up to 10 psychologists now, which is wonderful and very busy, of course. But for years we were at 6 or 7, and I think that shows that the district's adapted and flexible, and puts its assets where it's needed. The TC Bay Academy, Bay University, they've changed their names over the years, but you can see there's the staffing for them. There's 13 and 7, so that's about 20. That's 20 FTE in those specialized programs. Okay, so for the total staffing, here the first row there is the total staffing, and we showed what the changes were from the year prior. Our enrollment did go down a bit, not as much as we thought it was going to go down. Excuse me. That was Holly Wade. I'm wondering if she's calling me for that slide or not. Maybe not. I don't know.
It's different.
Speaker. Holly. But she's questioning me now. I think I might go back to there and say I must have said something, but
Yeah, maybe she's.
there might be a coincidence.
Might
Okay. Yeah. Can we text her and find out? We
nice.
want to get this right. But we didn't go down for as much as we thought we were going to go down. We went down 3 FTE, and I wanted to just show a couple of examples of why that happened. First is if you go to the Cappuccino, it went down 50 students. This is projected enrollment. And in the ratio, one section equals about 6 students. So if you divided that 50 by 6, you get the 8.3 sections, which is 1.6. So it went down 1.4, 1.6, right in that ballpark. But if you look at the Hills and Mills, they went down.
Pause there really quickly.
Yeah, go ahead.
So that first bullet where it says examples of what staffing changes are, and Dr. Black talked about the math involved there for what I've been calling, what I called last spring, as right sizing. So that's right sizing a school's FTE based on declining enrollment. It's not cutting program. So right sizing and cutting program are two very, very different things. Cutting program, in my opinion, requires a lot of input from the board. Are we going to cut a music class like orchestra? Are we going to cut a humanities class? Or, I mean, that's a major decision, but that's very different than right sizing FTE based on declining enrollment. And so we work really hard to find that sweet spot, to pay really close attention to what projections are. And when Dr. Black said that, we didn't go down as many students as we projected, that's good news. Like, that's what we want to hear. I was really impressed by what the enrollment ended up being at Cappuccino, Mills, Burlingame, and so on and so forth. So whenever we talk about, and we will talk about this possibly come next spring, who knows? I don't know what the projections are going to be yet. But if we have to right size, that's how we do it. As an example with that bullet.
Okay, I'm going to take a turn. So as a practitioner, yes, I totally understand that when we have decreasing enrollment, we have to take FTEs away just to kind of keep with the keep with our budget being appropriate. The concern, though, is when you start having decreasing enrollment, and this is not us, but I'm talking from an elementary perspective and a middle school perspective, it does impact programs, just coincidentally, not direct, because then you're having like which sections are going to be electives and which sections are going to be, so it just gets harder, but you need to downsize. I mean,
Totally.
what you're doing is downsizing. It's just when you downsize, there's some impacts to that.
Yeah, I like to
downsizing.
call it right sizing. But
I like calling it downsizing.
you'll see, President Land, you'll see later on in this presentation, to your point, the whole purpose of above level staffing that we do in a moment is to address what you're discussing, that
Right.
we may right size, but that could affect the breadth of elective program and thus end up cutting program.
Right.
And we don't want that to happen. So
Right.
we try to pay attention to that. And you'll see where we added more FT that's above level staffing to ensure that that wouldn't happen.
And I truly appreciate it, because in other districts, they don't take that into account.
Well, this is an example of where we are completely blessed as a basic aid district.
Right.
Right. In my previous districts that I've been a part of, there wasn't 50, 70 lines for staffing. There were like 2, LCFF and supplemental, and that's about it.
Right.
And that's all that was written in the stars. So
Trust me,
this
I'm
is a
well
blessing.
aware. Anyway.
Right. So we're going to end.
Nice
on
little
a high note.
tete-a-tete, but
Yeah.
we're making the same point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll end on a high note with the above formula, but just to get through these next 2 slides, the Hillsdale and Mills example. So Cappuccino's example of a decrease of 1.4 was based solely on this drop in enrollment, but the Hills and Mills decrease wasn't based solely on the students. They only had about 20 students each, lower than the year prior. But they had fewer teachers on evaluation, so then they had fewer instructional coaches. We eliminated 1 special education program at Mills, so they went down 1 FTE just based on that program. They had fewer ELD students at Hillsdale, therefore they had fewer sections, and then a decrease in grant sections. Those were all reasons why, when Brian did the analysis of why they went down, and it wasn't because of the 20 students. That had a little bit, but that wasn't the majority, the main reason. Okay,
There's a question here. So
No, it's just,
sorry, Bob.
I think if you look at Peninsula, the change in Peninsula and the change in Cap were about the same, but Peninsula was less impacted. Is that right?
Mhm.
And that goes to the next
And that-
slide, I think. Yeah,
yeah.
the above, the extra sections that were given to the Peninsula. And then if you, the bridge program was there too, so they generate other sections through those additional programs. But yeah, that's right. So the last, or almost the last slide, is the above formula staffing that we've talked a lot about. So there's 3 lines here. They can't show up in other ways, but this is the majority of them. So first of all, it's the counseling adjustment, as we talked about. And then the second row there is the 4.6 and above staffing formula. And, you can see that there was 2.0 to Cappuccino there. And then in all, they had 3.0 at Cappuccino as additional to staff from what the ratios would generate. And then all of these bullet point, or all of these lines under the above formula, those were all of the reasons why these extra sections were provided. As you can see, some were for support, some were just appeals to the superintendent, and they had good reason, and they were granted. Other ones came from, specific just individual school needs, like there was an APE class at Mills, for special education students or students with restrictions, and we added a section for that. So there's a variety of reasons for it, but I guess the point is, if you can look at the bottom cell there, it's 7.4 above formula staffing, not generated by any of the other categories. Okay, so things to this isn't a personnel presentation, but we did want to show that the staff needs of the school are generated by the school. They get their own staffing sheet, each school gets a spreadsheet. And when they have a vacancy, they put it under staffing needed. That's the box on the left, and then on the right, that generates how many openings they have. So in this case, they have 5 sections where they have vacancies on the left, and then that generates over on the other side that there's 5 that they can have and still meet their allocation. If there was a 6th there, then you would see that overstaff would be 1.0. So they're able to monitor, what they're posting and who they're hiring. And of course, Brian oversees this as well. So there's an extra set of eyes, but that's just an example of, how the sites kind of control their own vacancies. And it's all related to what the students' programs are and what the student demand is, and somewhat to recruiting. But as we've mentioned before, we're pretty fortunate here that we can recruit pretty much the teachers we need, and we're not inhibited by that. So considerations for the future, these we put a few up there, and we're obviously open to other ideas, but and we've talked, I think, about each of these already tonight. One is the program evaluation at sites in particular, or district-wide. We talked about how it's a necessary thing to do to evaluate the program, to see what the demand is, the cost is, could it be done better, in different ways. The hard part is, implementing some of the recommendations for changes for programs. The ELD student electives, we went into that a little bit with bridge students, and it's difficult because you have ELD students that come at different times to the schools. And if we're doing the staffing in the spring for the next year, we don't always have enough capacity in electives to provide all the choices to ELD students that we want to. So, we try to, there's ideas about having a cushion for ELD students that gets into, that we have sections for available in case we need it. And that's what's driving it. That gets into a recruitment issue because it's hard to find teachers during the school year. And if we do it before, then we may not have the need, because the students that are in the designated ELD program, some matriculate faster than others. Some have room in their schedule, more room in their schedules than others. Some aren't interested. Some are interested in electives. That's a tough one, but it's one that, I think there's an answer. There's a solution for. It's just deciding on what that is. And the smaller school staffing model, President Land mentioned it about, when the school is losing some of their enrollment, what do we do with the programs? How do we prop them up? Is the decreased enrollment just over, slated for a short period of time, or is it a longer period of time? And that drives, what kind of reaction we might have. So those were three ideas that we're considering as a district, and you all brought them up. So obviously it's on your radar as well. And we're open to others, after hearing the enrollment and the staffing presentation tonight.
So, Dr. Black, I really appreciate all that, and considerations for the future. These are things we talked about last spring as certain ideas, and I think the board knows our emphasis around supporting multilingual learners and throughout our district, and the needs that they may have. Continuing to evaluate the different programs at sites to ensure that there is equity in the sense of programs offered, breadth of electives, all of those kinds of things. And then possibly looking at some of our schools a little differently from one another because of certain needs. I mean, you notice in a couple slides ago, I mean, Cappuccino received 3.0 in above line staffing. And that was done because of, the district recognizing certain needs there. Will they need that every year? I'm not sure. It's going to be dependent on enrollment, but we may want to look at when schools hit a certain enrollment threshold that more is provided so that they're not having to scrape or possibly eliminate certain elective programs, which begets then more declining enrollment, right? You don't want to send your student to a school that there's not a lot of elective offerings. So then you're just in this kind of downwards spiral on enrollment. And so I pose all of these. We have about a half an hour left for conversation for us to start thinking about and talking about as we get closer to our November budget study session, as we get closer to January, February, when we start seeing enrollment projections, all those kinds of things. This is my plea to the board, I don't want to make these kinds of decisions in April or May. Way too late. We have a huge budget to develop. Yancey and his whole team, a huge budget to develop, and to make considerable staffing ratio considerations, along with possibly even having to negotiate those, takes a lot of time and a lot of consideration. So there's purpose behind having this study session in October, having a budget study session in November, and continuing on with our normal enrollment processes and projections and all that, so that we can make these kinds of decisions. You can give us direction leading up to March 15th, when, that is a hard and fast deadline around some staffing issues there. And as we continue, Yancey and his team build a budget that supports our students' needs. So I lay that out kind of at your feet or at your table for discussion, and really interested in input and answering any questions or doing any additional research that you would like to see provided.
Okay. Do you want to go to the next slide?
Oh, it's
Okay.
This is a
There
pretty
it is.
picture.
That was a hint. No, I didn't want to be presumptive. First of all, I mean, all of us I know are really grateful for all of being here and being part of the study session. Superintendent Booker, I think well planned, well thought out. I think it's important to have this and thinking ahead, planning. So let's dive right into it. Anybody want to start? I actually was going to say, you have questions. Okay, well, let's start with questions first. So Terry, why don't you start with questions?
Sorry. I don't know if you want to bring the slide back up, but sorry about that. I know they don't like me in the back when I bring up the slide. Sorry. Jorge and Lucy.
Which one?
So slide, see if I can just read my writing. Okay. Slide 14. I'm sorry, slide 14.
Uh-huh.
So that's about the staffing ratio. So the counselors, where it says the teacher's contract is 421 to 1, and the staffing sheet is 370 to 1. I was wondering if those counselors, yeah, page 14. Perfect.
There we go.
Perfect. Thank you. I was wondering, are those academic or mental health counselors?
Academic.
Academic. Okay. Do you think that's too high of a ratio, or is it working out fine?
That's a hard question to
Okay.
answer, right? And I also
Okay.
don't want to negotiate in public.
No. I know. I'm just wondering. Okay.
It's a control. So we've got
Okay.
three numbers, actually. I want to be
Right.
really clear
Okay.
and fair to the community. We have a teacher's contract number at 425 to 1.
Okay.
We have a staffing sheet number of 370 to 1. And then
Okay.
we have a reality boots on the ground of 345 to 1. Now, to be fair, if Mr. Childress is out there listening, this has been a request
Okay.
from
Okay.
DTA to lower that counseling size ratio. So that's why I say it's hard for me
Right.
to answer that question,
Okay, I
because
get
that's
it.
been a
I get it.
request.
I didn't mean to ask anything like
let's,
that.
let's
And
counter.
thank you for letting me know
So-
that's
so hold on.
academic. Thank you
So-
for letting me know it's academic counselors.
Right. So
Yeah.
let's ask the question though. What do other school districts, high school districts, what's their usual average counselor to counsel ratio? Do you know that? Do we know that?
I do. Oh, go ahead, Don.
Yep. You got a red light.
Why don't you just slide over to?
I was going to say, you can slide up to the podium or.
Well, we're part of, last year we went through the Hatch, presentation where they developed work and worked with our, counselors. It was a fantastic, experience. We'd always strive to do better, but I think in summary, we were, pleasantly surprised to see that these are some of the better ratios that you would see in the state, for high school. Could it be that, could do better? Sure, but compared to other high school districts or high schools, these are some of the better ones in the state.
I think that's what I was trying to get across because like you're saying, because I mean, you're asking some really good questions, but comparatively, I think our high school district has a much better ratio than other high school districts.
Thank you for that.
I would just say the average in California is about 500 students per counselor.
I think that's exactly what I was looking for.
Thank you for that.
Okay.
Okay, on page 19, I just had a mathematical question. I was waiting for Bob to ask this, but
I can't have my hands up.
I know. So, I think you mentioned that the numbers, the academic support is a percentage of the numbers below. So I was kind of wondering, it's not much of a difference between Cappuccino and Hillsdale, but it is, it's only about a half of an FTE between 3.4 and 3.8. But if you look at the number directly below, oh, never mind. I circled the wrong one.
You're shifting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I shifted over.
Yep. You
see?
were thinking BHS.
Yes. How did you know? You're mind reader.
Because I was
Okay.
looking at it.
Yeah, all right, all right. And then I have one final, I have just another comment about this and then I'll pause on my comments. I know we were talking about downsizing or right sizing, depends on who you talk to here. But we are basic aid, we're community funded, so we don't have to downsize or right size with every enrollment decline. Although if we downsize or right size, then I guess that would help us to ensure that staff receives much deserved cost of living increases. But I know it's a trade-off right there. So I want to make that comment because then we were talking about with declining enrollment, we wouldn't lose that LCFF funded because we're funding through basic aid, but then we have that
Correct.
Yep.
push and pull.
Correct.
Thanks.
Bob.
Well, I hope we wait till we actually see facts and circumstances before we start making budget decisions. But anyway, that I'm going to listen and look at the data. The one thing I asked about the counseling thing at the last meeting, and we brought up the other supports, and I've also asked that we get a board item on that to come back. So we'll hear more about that and what supports, and you don't have to go to the slide, but on 23, I was looking. And as I hear everybody folding to, you don't have to go there, but the thing when I circled it, I was kind of looking and I only see one support class. We added 2/10 for geometry support at Hillsdale. And I'm wondering, does that mean that we should be just doing academically great and support classes? We're able to handle it with the current staffing plan? Is it, can I draw any inferences from that information?
Well, so that's the above formula. So the 20.4 FTE for unduplicated, that all goes to those support classes. So, and that's above the general. So the fact that there's only two, I think means that, that
means that we should be doing well, or we don't have a lot of students that need to support classes
that aren't already in, or that
they're already have a plan. We have a plan, a staffing plan, and we're within that. So we're not. I'm trying to draw an academic performance.
Yeah, no, I get it. Yeah, and some things aren't FTE. Tomorrow, next Thursday at the board meeting, we're going to have an item for the Hillsdale model where they're doing a 0 period. But they're not actually, that's not a section and the kids aren't getting credentialed, but they're having all the students in 9th grade take geometry, but some of them don't have the algebra background to get them ready for algebra 2 in 10th grade. So they're going to this 0 period class. That's just one example, but support classes in and of themselves aren't the only method. We have these school student success coordinators at every school. The board approved, actually, there were homework center tutors, they were half-time. They're now full-time and they're at every school, and they have the libraries open till some schools at 5, 6 o'clock. And so they do like a swing shift. And then during the day when they're there, they all check in with the MTSS support program with students at school. And then they have the tutoring center after school. So all schools have flex periods and tutorials and that sort of thing. So there's a variety of ways to reach students that do need assistance besides the FTE.
I have one more, just quick
Please.
question. One quick question, and we really didn't, we talked a lot about smaller learning communities. We didn't talk about the IB program at CAP.
Okay.
That staffing model must work like every other sort of the traditional high school. So we didn't call it out. Is that correct?
It doesn't have smaller ratios. That's what you mean. What happens though, so they do have smaller classes, some of the higher level ones. So it is a challenge to have an IB program where some of the classes aren't, they don't have a lot of students in them. And that is the case at Cappuccino. And that's one of the issues that we have to look at when they're losing enrollment, and even when they had more enrollment, they had smaller upper division IB classes. It's definitely a consideration. I mean, it's a great program to have, but it can be expensive.
No, yeah, I can see where you have a larger enrollment, you have a lot more flexibility. If you run out of flexibility as you have that decrease in enrollment.
That's downsizing. That's downsizing. So I'm going to take a turn.
All right.
Because really what you said was very important, because these out of ratio FTE issues like zero period, like some other things to support, are really part of helping achievement and helping students who are at risk. And these are some equity issues that I think need to be accountable in our budget somehow. And I don't know how we capture things like that through our budget. So it's really interesting to me to see how can we do that, or what can we do? Because again, budgeting wise, my priority is that idea of equity, that idea of getting every student what they need. And with our struggling students, the downsizing issue and what Terry brought up with, well, we don't really need to change our enrollment. I get it, but what worries me is, one, we have to be fiscally responsible. So I'm looking at the fiscally responsible side, which is you two over there. And then there's that equity side of, well, we want to be out of ratio because we want to help these students, and sometimes smaller class size or smaller learning environments actually really are conducive to helping out and supporting the students, or giving extra support to them through zero period or something else, or giving them extra classes and whatever. So I want to think that achievement, or idea of increasing achievement and closing the gap, or whatever the term is these days, that we really focus on some of that when we are doing our budget priorities and doing our assessment for FTEs and our formulations here. And I think, again, I really want to kudos to all of you for really making the time, putting the effort in, really making us understand all the elements of what's happening, so that we can be prepared when we start talking about budget. What can we trade off? Where's our priority, or where do we have to hold the line with the budget? And Yancey, I get that. And, Superintendent Brooker, I get that as well. But it is going to be a horse trade in some ways. It's sometimes, where are we shifting? Where are we making the priority for equity? Where are we making some shifts so that, the foundations can still afford to certain schools, because we never want to take that away. But then how can we provide extra support to the schools that don't have the foundations and have students at risk? And how can we give extra support in that? So I think theoretically, this discussion, I think that's a very important part to what we're saying. And so I think I think we've all talked about it, but I think that's something that has to be a priority when we start talking about budget, and when we start talking about what numbers are going to look like at the different schools. So
I'm really glad. Can I comment real quick?
Yes, please.
I wanted to just thank you for bringing that up, because I do want to give credit to the DTA. They agreed to the flex at all of the schools. They voluntarily are doing the zero period at Hillsdale, and Hillsdale has that wonderful program that you've heard about. I mean, that's all volunteer work. And those are just some examples. I mean, the teachers and our classified staff are really dedicated to equity and making sure that we provide the support to the students, whatever they need, whatever support they need. And they've done it through volunteering, or through having less time and period so they can have flex time, because that's where they can catch students up. And we really got to give them credit, and I do want to assure you that they're on board with what you just said about the vision to equity and supporting of all our students, for sure.
And if we can support that volunteerism through whatever financial means we can
Absolutely.
provide
Yeah.
through external methods or MOUs or whatever, that would be great. Or that's where we want to discuss some shifting. But that's, again, a discussion that we want to have. But
Right. And we do, when they volunteer, they often volunteer to come in 0 period, but we do pay them. I mean, it's not, it's usually.
and that's important.
It's very important, but I mean, they don't have to do that at all. And if they didn't, those kids wouldn't get it, but they do volunteer for their time. They should be compensated and the kids are getting the service.
And there you go.
Yeah.
And I think that supports what we're trying to say.
Right.
So
Yeah. It's a team effort.
I have a question and then I have a comment to make. But the question, can we go back to page 19? I know for the last time. Okay.
Seems to be your favorite
No,
page.
I know the last time because I actually.
Oh, no, that's not a different one.
No, that's the right one. So I know I circled the wrong one, but my notes were right. Okay, so
Mhm.
I know there's must be a reason, right? But so CHS 3.4, HHS 3.8, but the right below it, you can see that CAP has a higher percentage than Hillsdale, but yet they have a lower. I'm sure there's a reason why.
There is a reason
I'm
why
sure.
Hillsdale does. Yeah, they have extra funding
Yeah.
and we put it
Okay.
on that
Okay.
sheet for the
It
smaller.
wasn't that I was looking at the wrong row. It's just that I didn't read my writing so well. So okay, so there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
And then the
Oh,
other,
good catch. Yeah.
thank you. And I wanted to thank you for the presentation, everybody working on this together. I think it's great to have this discussion. I wanted to mention something and kind of springboard off what President Land said about equity, because we're equity minded. I looked at the California dashboard earlier today, and there's certain school sites that are above the standard, below the standard, and for math and English. And last week, we studied, we had what's it called here? The spotlight on student learning, and that was excellent presentation as well. We have, we looked at the science, the CAST science scores, percentage by school site, and we saw that out of the comprehensive schools, the percentage range from 75% to 37%. And then we looked at ELD English. We looked at, ELA and also math. So for example, the CASP math score for 11th grade, that was sliced by ethnicity. So we have some ethnicities at 76%, 65%, Latinos 18%, which remember I said I was very solemn about that page. I just want to echo what President Land said regarding support. I know we have the union contracts, which is a certain number of students per teacher ratio, but I think we should be flexible on that for the support that's needed in these areas, focusing on equity. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other one? One last thing. ELD, because I forgot this and I really thought it was a great idea. When you brought up the ELD electives, student electives, I'm not sure what the solution is. I think you guys putting time into it, I think it's worthwhile. Again, electives help engagement, and EL students need that engagement to feel connected to whatever they're doing, and having them have an opportunity to get what they want versus just kind of fitting into wherever they can is a huge thing for in this. And so however you guys come up with it, whatever, we derive from this, that would be great. One of my suggestions was, I know sometimes we would overestimate, and then what are we going to do with the people at that time to do that, the enrollment or the FTE? What are we going to do? My suggestion is, one of the things that I remember our former superintendent started talking about Bridge, where providing opportunities and experiences and field trips, and maybe anyone who has that extra time on their hands because the FTE didn't fall out could have a bridge experience or create bridge experiences for our students to have them be part of what we were talking about years ago, which was, having them go to field trips and be rich experiences that they haven't had access to.
Yeah, well, we had a meeting with DTech just yesterday, and they're experts at that. I mean, they do
Exactly.
Oracle, so
Right. So very much along those lines.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was just my thought
Good.
on that. And
Thank you.
I wanted to mention that. Anyway, I would just want to say thank you very much. You guys were
Yeah,
outstanding. This is perfect timing. This is very valuable.
Sorry, are you wrapping up?
I'm wrapping up.
Oh, I wanted to ask a question that I just thought of. Back in the spring, I think it was, when the drama teachers were asking us to consider a release period, would this be something to consider? And like, is that relevant to this?
I mean, it's definitely part of staffing as a whole. It's
Yeah.
also connected to budget.
Okay.
But it is something that I've been thinking about with regard to Prop
28.
28 funds.
Oh, with the arts and music money?
Grant, yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah, okay.
it'll be something I'll have to reconvene some of the drama teachers. I know we're negotiating some of the appendices in our contract around that as
And
well.
that's one of them.
And that's one of them. Yeah, so
Okay, so I just didn't want that to like fall by the wayside. I
it
feel.
hasn't.
Okay,
Excellent. Thanks. Thanks.
thanks.
Can we take off the screen? Because I want to make sure that we have time for public comment. And is there anyone online who'd like to make a comment? Is there anyone in the
Yes.
audience? Oh, okay.
Yes, but we have Tiffany Spoyer who's ready to speak.
Okay, so let's have Tiffany brought up as a panelist, and you'll have it's a 3-minute time period, and we'd love to hear from you. And we won't start till we hear you.
Tiffany, you can unmute to begin.
There we go.
Great.
Hi, Tiffany.
Hi, how are you? I am Tiffany Sporer.
We're gonna hold on a second. We're not gonna have you start because we can barely hear you. So I'm not sure if it's on your end or our end. So try to raise your volume and we'll try here too.
Okay, give me 1 second.
Oh, you are
that's
perfect.
better.
It's perfect now. We got it. So Tiffany, go ahead and start when you're ready.
So my name is Tiffany Sporer. I'm the math teacher and the union building president at Peninsula High School. And I wanted to give public comments tonight to give an update on the current state of things at our school. To be really transparent, staff morale at our site is at an all-time low and stress is at an all-time high. As a continuation program, I'm sure you all know that we specialize in servicing students who are off track to graduate, who have been marginalized by the systems in our district, and who require a high level of both academic and socio-emotional support. However, as a direct result of losing 2.6 FTE, 2.0 of which was lost due to right sizing last year, our class sizes have increased and we're not able to adequately support the needs of our students. Our contract caps Peninsula High School classes at 28 students, but the California Department of Ed currently recommends a cap of 20 students for continuation programs. Presently, 20 of our 35 sections exceed this recommendation, and 8 of these classes exceed 25 students when we were promised a ratio of 24:1. Our staff has shared the following concerns, and I'm just going to bullet point them. It's not an exhaustive list, but we have less opportunity to build strong relationships with our students, some of whom are only with us for 12 weeks. We have less ability to provide targeted academic support. More of our class time is spent managing behavior and tension between students and supporting students who are avoiding class due to anxiety from larger class sizes. We have less time for interventions due to both our larger class sizes and a smaller staff taking on more co-curricular and leadership roles per person, causing certain initiatives such as our MTSS Tier 2, which is something that we desperately need at our school, to fall to the wayside. We have less adult supervision on campus and a resulting uptick in incidents involving drug and alcohol use on campus. On a related note, we lost our access to the TOOP program for our students to support substance abuse. In addition to the FTE we lost at the end of last school year, we lost our special education teacher at the start of this school year. Our certificated union membership emailed Superintendent Booker expressing concerns about the rotation of daily substitutes who are not special education teachers and the lack of services for our students with IEPs. He responded that we continue to have the position posted, and I know both Ron and Holly Wade are working to get the position filled. We will keep you updated on our progress to get the position filled. Our special education students are currently in their 7th week of school without receiving any services. Given all of the concerns I've expressed on behalf of our staff, I'm asking all of you to consider answers to the 2 following questions. How does the district plan to provide special education students at PHS the service minutes they are legally entitled to while we wait to fill the vacant special education teacher position? And if the district is not willing to appropriately staff Peninsula High School to provide the heightened academic and socio-emotional support required by our students, then what is the district's vision for the students at Peninsula? Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other speakers?
Yes, we have Rachel Lauderdale. I will bring her in now.
Okay. Hi, Rachel. Hi, Rachel.
Hey everyone, thanks for letting me speak. It's really good to see you all. I'm sorry I'm not there in person. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Rachel Lauderdale, the Vice President of the Teachers Association. And thank you for that thoughtful conversation. I was in the middle of planning our MTSS time on Monday, so I was in and out of listening, but I appreciate the conversation. I also appreciate hearing from my sister Tiffany at Peninsula, and I just want her and the Peninsula Pumas to know that we stand with you. Thinking about staffing ratios, I know you just heard a zillion numbers and a zillion different formulas and ways of thinking about the numbers. But what I really want you to encourage you to think about is the humans that are behind those numbers. And when we think about equity and anti-racism, that requires student relationships and the relationships that educators have with our students. That is the core of equity and anti-racist work. And it is impossible to do that when our jobs are unsustainable. And so when you're thinking about these numbers and thinking about what our class sizes look like, thinking about where FTEs fall and how many students equals 0.2 or 0.4 or 0.6, think about also the sustainability of your educators. We are so lucky to have some of the best educators that you can find anywhere in this district. And the only way we keep our educators is when our jobs are sustainable. And when you ask us to do more with less, it becomes more and more unsustainable. And you get to the point where educators feel like they can't handle this job anymore, that they can't do what's best for their students and feel good about coming to work every day because they don't feel like they can service their students enough. And when our jobs are sustainable, our students benefit from that. And so I just would encourage all of you to think about not only the numbers, but the educators that go behind those numbers and the students who suffer when our jobs are unsustainable. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel. Is there anyone else?
No, I don't see anyone else.
Okay. Any final thoughts, comments, questions? Okay, seeing none, I just
want to say thank you again to everybody involved. Yeah, it's a great presentation and great discussion.
I would just second that. I'm not going to say anything different. So, all right, we are going to conclude our meeting. I'm going to adjourn the meeting, and we have an agenda setting meeting right after for two of us. All right, thank you very much.